This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meatpackers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Much news, much happening. I'm going to have my Israeli partners, my counsel, on the third segment of this hearing. It's like a hearing, I have to say it, because we're actually litigating COVID-19, the damage that was caused by the communist Chinese, both in the United States and in Israel. And of course, we're doing it. The American people, the Israeli people are doing it. The governments aren't doing it. They've abdicated their responsibility. And I've been constructively critical with the president in that regard. And you'll hear more about that in the third and final segments of the show, the verdict section. And listen carefully, because it tells you why it takes a revolution. Forget the scandal industry. It tells you why, and I ask you to go out and pre-order my new book, It Takes a Revolution to Forget the Scandal Industry, because we, the people, can no longer depend on our so-called governments who represent themselves and don't represent we, the people. And let me give you an example of that. Just this week, a Senate report came out by Senator Ron Johnson detailing how Hunter Biden laundered millions of dollars from the Ukraine and perhaps sex trafficking, it's alleged, to enrich himself. How he used his father, Joe Biden, traveled on Air Force One to rake in money to be able to get involved in a company called Burisma and other interests overseas, for which he had zero expertise. Remember who Hunter Biden is. He's a former drug addict. He's someone who impregnated a woman out of wedlock and then disclaimed it, had to be forced to admit that the child was his. He's a lowlife. He's scum of the highest order. Now, his father claims to know nothing about this. Now, if you believe that, you believe in the tooth fairy. Now, perhaps Joe Biden's only defense is that he's brain dead and doesn't know what's going on around him currently. But at the time this happened, he clearly did, and he most likely got kickbacks from his son, profited in some way from all that was going on. Now, what does our worthless Attorney General Bill Barr do, who I call Blowhard Bill or Puxatawny Bill because he hides in a hole like the groundhog in Puxatawny, Pennsylvania? Nothing. He said Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are off limits. He's not going to do it. He's not going to stick his neck out and indict them, because to do so would cause him to have blowback. You know, everybody in Washington in positions of power, thanks to the deep state on all sides, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you want to call them, have dirt on each other. If you push too hard on the other side, blowback will come back on you. So here's what happens. These individuals like Barr and others go on Fox News if you're a conservative or Republican. If you're a leftist and a Democrat, you go on MSNBC or CNN. The networks are very happy to have you, these cable networks, because it helps them boost advertising dollars, boost viewership, creates sensation, and creates money, hard cash. So basically, it's a racketeering enterprise between all of them. And that's why my book is styled and titled, It Takes a Revolution to Forget the Scandal Industry. The American people need to turn off Fox News. They need to turn off MSNBC and CNN. They need to rise up. And I might add, the one thing that the left and the right have in common, as I've said many times, is that none of us believe anything the government tells us anymore. Nearly everything that comes out of its mouth is a total lie. And if it's not a total lie, then it gets covered up and nothing gets done. Again, ask yourself the question. Our Attorney General, Blowhard Bill, who allowed for an appeal when the Bundy's dismissal was dismissed. Can you believe that? These people went through 2 years of being in prison, thrown in solitary confinement, perjury suborned by the prosecutors. They were entrapped. There was a kill list on their head at Bureau of Land Management. The Trump Justice Department allowed this appeal to go forward. We had to fight that, and finally, they won. I was their defense lawyer at the Ninth Circuit, of all places, just a few weeks ago after all of this time. And I'll tell you something. If Trump loses this election, the Bureau of Land Management, the radical environmentalists, the radical Indians, they'll all be back trying to take that property away from the Bundys again, that they've ranched for 150 years. But see, this is the problem, is that the government has broken away from the people. It's broken away from the people to the point that it's become tyrannical. As Thomas Jefferson said, when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. But when the government fears the people, there's liberty. But who is it that's pushing back? It's not our Justice Department, my once proud alma mater, which has become corrupt to the core. The federal judges will not stand up to these forces, government forces, because to do so will compromise their ability to be appointed to higher posts. They incorrectly believe that they have immunity. They don't have immunity. That's not in the Constitution. They incorrectly believe that they're there for life. The Constitution simply says they serve for good behavior. Congress can certainly make it clear, but they won't, that they can be removed when they don't do their job. And that's what I discuss in my book. And I talk about how citizens' grand juries are now necessary to enforce the rule of law and our Constitution. And let me tell you something else. I'm writing a column. I've written a column this week. Go read it at freedomwatchusa.org. And it's about Trump's failure to take action as Ronald Reagan would take. Yes, I support the president personally. I don't endorse him as the head of a public interest group. Yes, I want him to win. Yes, he is 1,000% better than the brain-dead Joe Biden and the evil witch Kamala Harris. But he can invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, notwithstanding the fact that he's doing nothing with regard to China and redressing the damage, other than talking big and acting little. But the Insurrection Act of 1807, signed by Thomas Jefferson, who I dedicate my book to, allows him to mobilize the armed forces and even local police to put down an insurrection when local and state public officials fail to do their job. It's been used many times, even during the 20th century. President Eisenhower in Arkansas for desegregation and those kinds of things. It's been used. But the president hasn't invoked it. And if you believe that our Justice Department has locked up many people, then why isn't the left screaming about that? They're not even. Barr said that they've charged 1,200 people, but most of those people are back on the streets. Why are they on the streets? And this is because the president is playing a cynical game. He's letting this violence occur because he thinks that will get him reelected. He thinks it's going to cause a backlash against these radical leftist groups, whether it's radical blacks, radicals of the Jewish left, and I'm Jewish, so don't accuse me of anti-Semitism. I'm a Jewish Christian. Whether it's radical feminists, radical atheists, radical LGBTQs, radical Muslims, radicals of all stripes. It's cynical, but at the same time, people are dying. Police are being shot. Young kids, 1 year old sometimes, are being killed. It's not enough to play a political game. Now's the time to take control. And my article says, do you think Ronald Reagan would have tolerated this for 24 hours? Lickety split. He would have taken care of business. And that's why, I speak out. I speak out of tough love for the president, because you know what? Unless he starts taking action, notwithstanding all the election fraud that's occurring with the mail-in ballots, where they're sending out millions of mail-in ballots and no one can control, he'll lose the next election because he's going to lose part of his base. And he's going to lose people who believe in law and order. And that's why Sheriff Joe Arpaio and I, and we support the president personally, we have started americasheriff.org. You can go to americasheriff.org and see what it is that we're doing and join that. And we have to take action. And then this morning, rather I should say Friday morning, I turn on the television, I see Benjamin Crump, the lawyer of the Trayvon Martin family, lawyer of every radical black family who says the police killed them unjustly, pouring it up on TV. I mean, the guy can't even put a sentence together. He wrote a book, Open Session, Legalized Genocide of Colored People, published, if you can believe this, by the owners of Fox News. Listen to that. Open Session, Legalized Genocide of Colored People. Obviously, baiting a race war. Blacks resent the fact of using the word colored people now. I mean, this is so obnoxious and so abhorrent. This is the same guy who was alleged, and I was representing George Zimmerman at the time. I no longer represent him because of tortious interference by a third party, of which a lawsuit will be brought when I have the time. But we sued Benjamin Crump for that, for defaming George Zimmerman, for saying that he was responsible largely for what's been going on, when in fact he was acquitted in self-defense, when in fact it was Trayvon Martin who was hunting him down and pounding his head into the concrete. And thank God he had a weapon to defend himself. This is Benjamin Crump. He's out there in Louisville as we speak, whipping up hatred against white people, against the cops. There's going to be a lot more violence in Louisville, Kentucky, yet no one does anything about Benjamin Crump. He should be locked up right now because he is causing violence as part of the Insurrection Act of 1807. This is where we live in today, and this is why you need to step forward. It's why it takes a revolution, forget the scandal industry. It's not like Hannity in his book, his phony book, which was written by his staff. Hannity doesn't have the ability to write anything on his own. Live free or die. I call it live free or lie. He goes through his monologue. We've heard the monologue thousands of times. Then he says, vote for President Trump. That's not going to save this country. Yes, we want the president to win. A lot better than Biden. But what happens after 4 years? And he won't get much done anyway. We're probably going to lose the Senate. Conservatives will lose the Senate. So consequently, rise up, purchase my book. It takes a scandal industry. It takes a revolution. Forget the scandal industry. And let's get to work. Get up off the couch. Turn off Fox News. And let's save this country. I'll be right back with the second segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.
Dangerous.
Don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
The Supreme Court, like all federal judges, their justices are chosen on the basis of political patronage, meaning campaign contributions by special interests, lobbying, you name it, Democrat or Republican. That's why in the past, particularly the recent past, we've seen the judges break along party lines. They break along conservative and leftist lines. And it's almost totally predictable with the exception of Chief Justice John Roberts, who now has come out of the closet, at least in terms of his legal profession. He's in the closet otherwise. There are many rumors in Washington, D.C., and that may be why he's scared to stick his neck out. And he's become a leftist. And therefore, all this emphasis on the Supreme Court, I have to agree with one of my clients and friends, Chief Justice Roy Moore. If the Supreme Court issues a decision which is contrary to the Constitution or the natural law or the law of God, American people have no duty to follow that law because these people who sit on the Supreme Court, by and large, with a few exceptions, I love Justice Thomas, Alito I think is pretty good, Gorsuch somewhat. Kavanaugh has gone left because he's worried about being impeached that some other woman's going to show up and falsely accuse him of something. But they're a bunch of political hacks. Let's be honest about it. So whoever the president nominates, it's not the be-all and end-all of saving this country. It's too convenient to rock back and wait for the Supreme Court to make decisions because they make decisions on the basis of politics. They don't really represent the interests of the American people. They represent themselves. They represent the people that put them in power. So to be honest, I could care less who's nominated to the Supreme Court anymore. I don't know how many times, with the exception of the Cheney Energy Task Force, I've tried to get in front of the Supreme Court on important issues, and they won't take it because it involves controversial, in quotes, clients of Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch. or in my private practice. They don't want to stick their neck out. But the American people need to stick our neck out. Now, Trump boasts about all the so-called Trump judges that he's appointed. Read my book and you'll see my experience. I've had experience with 7 of them as far as the time I wrote the book, now 8 of them. And these judges are not what they're cracked up to be. They got there on the basis, again, of political campaign contributions by special interest groups that want their yes men on the bench. Many of them are young and ambitious, so they don't want to make decisions, sticking their neck out, doing the right thing because the opposition party can prevent them, in this case the Democrats, from ever getting a higher post on an appellate court or in the White House or wherever. By their very nature, by the very fact that they got to the federal bench, they had to become yes men, just like the yes men of King George III in the days, months, and years leading up to the revolution. They are not courageous people. And that's why we, the American people, need to rise up ourselves. And we need to use whatever tools we have to bring about a peaceful and legal revolution. When you see the Benjamin Crumps out there whoring it up, whipping up a race war, I mean, I don't know how the guy passed the Florida bar. He must have paid somebody to do it. That's my speculation. Because I'll tell you something. These kinds of people, they're not bright, and they're not wise, and frankly, they're evil. And they want to create a division between the races in this country to benefit themselves. You know, he just settled a case because the city of Louisville rolled over and paid $12 million to Breonna Taylor's family. He obviously made a lot of money. Before that, he was bankrupt. And, you know, whoever now is handling the case, given the tortious interference that occurred with regard to my representation against Benjamin Crump, now has perhaps a deep pocket to get collection for the defamation of George Zimmerman. But this is very, very serious because we, the American people, hold our fate in our own hands. And that's why I want you to buy the book, order it, pre-order it, because it's going to be scarce. You know, it's going to go like hotcakes. Pre-order It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. And get up off your couch and do something. This is our conservative manifesto, our conservative manifesto of our founding fathers. It is dedicated to Thomas Jefferson. It explains that he said that federal judges would become despots because they're unelected, not accountable to the people, believing that they have life tenure, even if they don't, believing that they have immunity from anything they do. And this is why we need to end all of this, and we need to take control ourselves. I'm going to be back with our Israeli counsel, Ari and Ruth Maknis, who are very courageous people fighting for you in Israel. That case in Israel has ramifications here in the United States as well. So listen carefully. I'm going to be right back with my Israeli colleagues. And thank you for listening to us. We are in dire times, and we need to take action ourselves, we the people.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I'm back with my very fine legal colleagues in Tel Aviv, Israel, Ruth and Ari. I want them to introduce themselves yet again. They are working with Freedom Watch and themselves. We brought a class action in Jerusalem for the pandemic caused by COVID-19. It's hitting Israel particularly hard right now. Obviously, it's a small country compared to the United States, and even a few deaths register much more on the so-called Richter scale there than they do here. And recently, with regard to that case, there have been some developments. I want to turn it over to Ruth first to tell us what's happening with our COVID-19 class action in Jerusalem, Israel, and a new whistleblower who's come forward. His name is Danny Soham, S-O-H-O-M. He was formerly with the Israeli Military Intelligence for Biological and Chemical Warfare. He's a bioweapons expert with the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies in Bar-Han University. Ruth, tell us what the current status is on that case and how we're proceeding and how it's moving relatively quickly, and how the Israeli Attorney General is apparently coming in on behalf of the communist Chinese, if you can believe that.
Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Ruth Maknes from Israel. I'm an advocate. I file the class action in Israel in cooperation with Freedom Watch and Larry Kleiman. Right now, the legal situation is the Chinese have 2 weeks to file a response to the class action that we filed. If the Chinese government will not file their response, then we are going to turn to the court in Israel and ask for a judgment. Suddenly, a week ago, the Attorney General of Israel asked the court to review the class action. We answered his request and we rejected it. The reason we rejected it is because the Chinese never bothered to respond to the class action, and they didn't claim for immunity. As long as the other side never responded and never claimed for immunity, the general attorney has no basis to interfere or interact with a class action. Only in case that we'll get a response, then I can understand that he wants to get involved. But as long as the other side never responds, he has no reason to ask to get involved. So we rejected it. The judge approved to the general attorney to respond, to review the class action. And we filed an appeal on this matter. We're waiting right now for the result of the appeal. We hope that the judge understands that there is no basis for the Attorney General to interfere. What strikes me here is the interest of the General Attorney is to take care of the Israeli citizens that really hurt from the situation. As everybody knows, the economic situation here is terrible. People, they're not working, they quit their job. And I think that the Israeli citizens, they deserve to get their compensation as a result of the virus that leaked from the Wuhan laboratory. Then what is the interest of the general attorney to take care of the Chinese government? His interest is to take care of the Israeli citizens and give them the compensation they deserve as the result of this catastrophe, the leak of the virus from the Wuhan laboratory. I don't think the interest of the general attorney is to take care of the communist Chinese government. And I'm surprised that he seeks to get involved in their favor and not in the favor of the Israeli citizens that really strive and needs this important compensation to get them out of the economic situation.
Ruth, this raises the question. What the Chinese have on Prime Minister Netanyahu and the rest of the government there, as the Chinese obviously have something on President Trump as well, because all we hear from him are insults towards China, claims that we have the biggest military in the world, but his Attorney General, Bill Barr, who I called blowhard Bill Barr because all he does is talk, he doesn't do anything, hasn't done anything to freeze Chinese assets in this country, to be able to collect on the damage they have done. We have a class action as well in Dallas, Texas. We've had the same issues trying to serve the Chinese. They have no respect for the American legal system. We went through the clerk of the court. They refused to accept the service. We went back to the court. We're asking them for alternative service right now on the embassy in Washington, D.C., or on their law firms. They have American lawyers. They're very sophisticated, the Chinese. But the big question is, what do the Chinese have on Prime Minister Netanyahu and the rest of the government that they would send the general attorney, as we call it here, an attorney general, in to intervene in your lawsuit, apparently to try to protect the Chinese, claiming that they're immune from suit. That's not going to succeed because, the Israeli Ministry of Justice is independent of the executive branch, and it's very much in and of itself, and it won't succeed here either. But it tells you something about the power of the Communist Chinese, because they bought up lots of assets in Israel. They bought up lots of assets in the United States. And I believe they're blackmailing, both your government and our government into being able to continue on with what is obviously a bioweapon. Now, I want to turn to this new whistleblower, Danny Soham. You sent me some information about him. Tell us what he has to say. We also have other experts. We have a professor who is an expert in bioweapons at the University of Illinois called Francis Boyle. And we have Judy Mikovits, who is a doctor of virology, a PhD, who worked with Anthony Fauci at Fort Detrick, and they're all testifying that this was a bioweapon. So there is no immunity. So we can bring suit. It's a violation of international treaties and international law. It's a terrorist weapon. But tell us about Danny Soham, and obviously, we will be using him for testimony in one manner, shape, or form in our cases.
Sure, yes. I must add that according to the law in Israel, a tort action, you cannot enforce immunity on a court, on a tort. So even if they claim for immunity, the law in Israel will not approve the immunity because it's a tort action. Regarding your question about Danny Soham, I know that Danny Soham used to work for the Mossad in Israel. He investigated the laboratory in Wuhan. He has a lot of information, and he claims that it's a bioweapon that escaped from the lab. Sokovolsky Advocate, which is next to me, talked a lot with Danny Soham, and he has more details about the information. I will transfer you to my colleague, Arya Sokovolsky.
Hi, hello. What Danny Soham, hello, you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. So, according to Danny Soham, there is a military facility in Wuhan and also civil facility of bioweapon that deals with dangerous viruses like the corona and other viruses, and maybe either from the military or the civil, this virus was escaped, and Danny Soham claims that this is a violation of the bioweapon treaties, and handling these bioweapons in those laboratories in Wuhan that is a severe violation of the bioweapon treaties. And also in United States there is a safety guard, but in these laboratories there is no safety guard in the laboratories. There must be a degree 4. It's called the biosecurity degree 4. But in Wuhan, it's the lesser degree. It's degree 2. So there is no security measures that can protect from leaking of viruses in this lab, and this is the result. He claims that this is the result of not having a security measure in the Wuhan lab.
So we now have three very fine experts, Francis Boyle, Judy Mikovits, and Danny Soham. Yes. And we're confident that we're going to get a judgment in Israel, and we're pushing hard in the United States. But what's your take on what's going on in Israel right now? I understand you're on lockdown, that the prime minister has ordered everybody to stay home and can't come out. What's happening over there now with COVID? Because it's doing a lot of damage to Israel.
Yes. Now the Israeli government decided that for 16 days there will be a quarantine. Nobody can leave the house. Nobody can go to work. Everything is closed. And this is also the feast days of Yom Kippur and Sukkot, so people cannot pray in synagogues. They must pray in small groups outside the open air. And it's very hot today and tomorrow, so people cannot pray outside. It's very hot, so there is no prayers or less prayers outside, maybe indoors, and people cannot work. The estimate damage of this quarantine for 16 days to the economy of Israel, it's estimated 35 trillion new shekels. It's $10 trillion for 2 weeks. And yes, and I think they will prolong this quarantine in another 2 weeks, and we cannot see the end of this. Here is Ruth.
Ari and Ruth, it shows you how important that our lawsuits are, is that our own governments are unwilling to take action for a lot of different reasons. And it's not enough. And, I personally am going to vote for the president. I hope he wins. I support him. But, it's not enough just to threaten China with our military might and insult them by calling it the Kung flu virus from China. People are smarter than that. And he's going to lose a lot of his supporters going into the election on November 3rd unless he starts to man up and go to the plate. And Netanyahu is becoming increasingly unpopular over COVID-19 as well. He already had problems with regard to being indicted for alleged bribery. I believe that's a trumped-up witch hunt. But in any event, he's got problems. And the Israeli people and our fellow Jews in general, we're not tolerant people, okay? We complain a lot. And this is a big problem politically for the Israeli government, and it's going to be a problem for Trump unless somebody does something to support us in our lawsuits, because we're out there all by ourselves. Comments, Ruth, on that? We have about 10 seconds left. Hang on the line. I'm going to keep you into our next segment because I want to continue this conversation because it's very important. We'll be right back with the verdict section of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with the verdict. The verdict is that the governments of Israel and the governments of the United States are not serving the people. For whatever reason, they're serving their own interests. They're not holding the communist Chinese accountable as the COVID virus gets worse and worse in Israel, and in many ways worse here as well, because we just got unemployment figures for the last quarter, and there were more jobless claims than the prior quarter. Things are not going well. For whatever reason, even if there are scare tactics that are being put out there to overemphasize the threat of COVID. In fact, there are statistics that came out of the Center for Disease Control, Ruth and Ari, just yesterday, which show that 99% of the people that contract the virus don't die. They are cured. So there's a lot of reasons why COVID-19 is used as scare tactics right now. People have said, for instance, in the United States, the Democrats are using it and their allies in the leftist media to try to take control of the country and to bring the president down. Yet he doesn't take any action against the communist Chinese, so he's not helping himself. And in Israel, COVID-19 is being used against Netanyahu because there are many leftist Jewish interests over there that want to have him removed. But that being said, neither of them are doing themselves any favors because they're not taking any action. As usual, both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu talk big, but act little. That's my opinion. I want to get your opinion, Ruth and Ari, on that.
My opinion is the same thing that happens in the United States happens here in Israel. The media is controlled by the left wing, and we hear all the time how they're trying to scare the people. A lot of people are dying out of depression, being stuck in their homes, not being able to get out from fear. They control people by fear. From what we know, people don't die from the COVID-19 unless they above age 80 or has other diseases. They make it more than it is. And they definitely scare people here and control the people by fear. I think this situation is the same exactly like what happens in the United States. The quarantine, Bibi Netanyahu said that the quarantine going to be exactly the same way they did it in Melbourne. And he talked to the mayor and the prime minister in Australia, and they're going to repeat the same pattern here in Israel. And we know that over there in Melbourne, it's been 7 months that they've been locked in quarantine. And I'm really concerned that that's what's going to be here in Israel. And like you said, the Israelis especially and the Jews don't have a lot of tolerance. And there will be a lot of protest here, and there was a lot of protest. And they will not take this harsh.
Well, Ruth, and that's the irony. We have a few minutes to go, but at the same time that COVID-19 has destroyed health in the economy, perhaps it hasn't destroyed health as much as being propagated by interests that want to take down both governments, but still huge amounts of damage to the economy and everything else, is that the governments fail to act. And they just accept it as if we can let the communist Chinese go merrily along and continue this. And all the time they're building up their military forces. They're now as powerful, if not more powerful, than the United States in that regard, regardless of what the president here says. And nobody's doing anything except Ari and Ruth Maknis in Israel and Larry Klayman here in the United States. And this is why I wrote my recent book. If I can give a little plug to it, I'm going to send you all copies. It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, because the American people and the Israeli people need to rise up. They can't roll over. You can pre-order my book at Amazon.com and other major booksellers online. And I want everybody to read it, and I want them to follow what you're doing. We're going to have to conclude it here, Ruth and Ari, because we're out of time, but I'm going to bring you back. You're my great partners. We love you. Please continue to be the brave people you are. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. We'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.